you with us today. And I am also thrilled to be introducing Cynthia Sims. Cynthia is an assistant professor. Sorry, at the Human Resource Development Department, and she's totally and most definitely a friend of the center because we have her over a lot, and I've heard her speak on this topic many times. I know you'll enjoy it. And again, thank you to everyone for coming. And now I'm going to let Bobby Ratu moderate the rest of the meeting for us.
How's everybody doing today?
Yay! Good, good, good.
Good. Well, I just want to say hello this morning. Real quick, it looks like, do I have control, or who's going to have control this morning? How are we going to run this? Let's see. We're going to get ourselves in order here.
Well, I made you a co-host.
Awesome.
So
let's see.
I thought I did. Maybe I did now.
Well, I would love to introduce Dr. Cynthia Sims, but no sense in me introducing her. She can just introduce herself. But first, Dr. Sims is really going to guide us through this great conversation. I'm going to ask lots of questions because I think her work is fascinating. And I'm fascinated by the idea of having mentors and sponsors and coaches surrounding you. As a business owner as well, I like to have a group of people that surrounds me so that I can be successful. And so I'm excited to really tap into her knowledge base. I think it's going to be a lot of fun and to bring a lot of value to what we're doing today. So Dr. Sims, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I'm Cynthia Sims. I'm an assistant professor here at Clemson University, part of the College of Education in the Human Resource Development Program. So a couple of times if I'm in a SHRM meeting, Society for Human Resources, and I say, how many of you have a master's in human resource development? A lot of hands go up. So, but my background, in addition to having a degree in organizational leadership, doctoral degree, I also have many years of corporate experience. I was in a Fortune 100 company and had a lot of director titles: Director of Human Resources, Director of Learning and Development, Director of Operations, Director of Organizational Development. So I've done the gamut. In addition to working for an international consulting firm, doing a lot in leader and management training and development. So I have parlayed that into an academic career where I have done a lot around mentoring. So I am an empty nester. My daughter has flown the coop to New Zealand and won't come home. What's up with that? And I'm from Chicago, and I now live in Greenville, South Carolina. So love the weather. So it's good to be here.
So Dr. Sims, before we get started and before you really share your knowledge, I do want to tell our group that's joining us today just a few things so that we can have some fun. First of all, if you are willing, we would love to see you. We'd love to see your face and even wave. So I'm looking like Jennifer is showing her face, and I know people have probably want to keep us from seeing inside. I see Lucy. What's up, Lucy? How are you? And then let's see. I see Carl's nice headshot. But if you'd like to share so we can see you, that'd be great, especially when we talk. Also, if you have questions in the midst of this, there's a chat section that you can turn on. If you go to the bottom, you can click the chat button and it will pop up on the right-hand side for you. And so feel free to ask a question there. And then I might stop Dr. Sims and say, hey, we got a question. Let's chat about this real quick. So just some basic ground rules there. And really appreciate everybody being here. First thing off is, Dr. Sims, you're going to jump in real quick, but why do you want to share with us today? Why do you get excited about the idea of mentors and sponsors and coaches and this whole idea of networking? What gets you fired up about this?
A couple of different reasons. One is that I'm fascinated by leadership and, how do we actually develop as leaders? How do we show up as leaders? Leadership has a huge impact on organizations and individuals. And how does one become a leader? A lot of time that has to do with having a mentor, a coach, and a sponsor. And there's a lot of research that says individuals who have that level of support are going to go further, be better leaders. So that's why I get excited about it.
So tell us, I know in your next slide you're going to basically lay out a couple things, but give us a couple items that we're going to walk away with after when we finish up today.
Well, you should have received a mentor map, a networking map, and that's really one of the key things that I'd like to make sure that you walk out of this with is that map, and really to look at where you are today and where you want to go in terms of saying, hey, do I have the level of support in terms of the individuals that I need either as a mentor, a coach, or a sponsor to get me where I want to go? A lot of times we may have fallen into maybe a level of comfort where we haven't really evaluated where we are and where we want to go, and we may not have the networks that we need to get us to that next step. Or as that old saying goes, what got you here won't get you there.
That's awesome. So do you want us to kind of walk through your slides? Would that help, Dr. Sims?
Yeah, what I'd like to do is just get through a couple, and then we can have some conversation. Make sure that I lay the ground rules out, because a lot of times people are very familiar with what a mentor is. They may not be as familiar with coaching and sponsorship and why that matters.
That'd be awesome. Well, just lead away, and then I might interrupt you a little bit, and we're going to have a little bit of conversation.
I'd love that. Thank you. All right, so we're going to talk about the network approach to mentors, sponsors, and coaches. And so what I'd like to really do is to really get to the introduction. So a lot of times, and even in the research, if you look at it, a lot of times these words are used synonymously. So you may be saying, hey, what's all of this about? And some of you who have, and it is really nice being back with Corporate Center for Learning, and I've had a couple of interactions. So if I haven't seen you before, it's nice meeting you. And for those of you who I have interacted with, it's nice to be back. And so some of you who might have a manager who might serve in all of these roles, but I would like to just think about when people think about mentoring, what comes to mind?
Well, I have to say that when I think about mentoring, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday, I really think about the idea that I teach my students is to surround yourself with smart people. And I think about mentors, I think about coaches, but whether it's in the business world or the professional world or in a personal world, the different hats that we wear, how do we surround ourselves with people that make you look smart, and you can also make them look smart, and it's a mutual type of relationship. That's what comes to mind for me.
I also think of it as somebody who acts in a way, it's not necessarily what they say, but they behave in a way that's congruent with their values, and somebody that you would sort of say, I see how they act, and I would love to, in a way kind of emulate that. And how did they get to where they are? And just kind of being around somebody is sort of feeding off of that.
Really nice. Thank you. Any other thoughts on that before we sort of get to the next part? So one of the things when you start thinking about mentor, and I love this image, so it really goes back to the Greek where you had Athena, and you had who appeared in the role as mentor. So just think how many of us would love to have a goddess who was all knowledgeable to guide us on our way. There was a request because this individual was going on sort of that heroic journey. And so she took the form of mentor to guide him. And so that's really where the term comes. And a lot of us may have those sort of heroic thoughts. You know, you think of, for example, Glinda in The Wizard of Oz, or Galadriel in The Lord of the Rings, or even Yoda in Star Wars. You know, so those are all concepts of mentoring that comes from the Odyssey. And mentors are typically thought of as friends, someone that can help and guide. And so these are some of the benefits of mentoring. So you can see that a lot of times they perform in these different roles and functions. You can see a tutor, a coach, but it's really a role taken on by someone who is willing to help someone learn and grow by agreeing to sort of interact with this person to transfer experience and skills. I'm sure a lot of you, and maybe by a show of hands, when you started your organization, you may have been given a mentor. Show of hands, anybody done that? Okay. All right. So there's been an evolution of mentoring over time, and that's what we're going to really talk about. And most of us are familiar with what we call sort of that one-on-one hierarchical mentoring, where you have someone who's more senior interacting with someone who's more junior. Is typically someone who has targeted coaching. So a lot of times if you're new to an organization, they're going to put you into a mentoring relationship where you're the new kid on the block and someone's going to really show you those ropes. And so the nice thing about that, a lot of times the protege's privacy can be protected. It's an efficient use of time, sort of that one-on-one. And a lot of times organizations have they're expecting a return on this. You know, you're going to get up to speed quickly. And so the results are measured, you know, can you hit that ground running once you have this mentoring? What are some of the disadvantages of mentoring? It is limited time, it is one-on-one, so it is definitely investment, in that it assumes that the mentor has all of the knowledge necessary to provide that sort of comprehensive approach, and that mentor wants to have that role. So that's one. Bobby and I were talking about a little bit yesterday about sort of reverse or tech mentoring. And a lot of times people think of that as, you know, someone who might be younger, who is very tech savvy, mentoring maybe a more established person who may be not as much as. And so that is one where, or you might have, we used to call it sort of skip sessions, where people at the top hear from people who may be in first or level positions so that they can get that sort of ground store knowledge. The proteges definitely feel valued, but there could be this perception of, you know, am I giving secrets away that I shouldn't? You know, perceptions of favoritism, might be jealousy on people's part. People may not be as forthcoming. You know, if you've been invited to the boss, and I've had that situation where the CEO invites you to lunch, you know, what do you say? How much do you share? And there's really no measurable outcomes associated with that. Show of hands, peer mentoring. How many of you have worked in a collective, maybe a small group, a couple of you have gotten together to mentor one another as a group of peers? Okay, good. You know, so that's really something that is very valuable, something any organization can do. And we have some structures around that, but it's a way to really have a group self-support one another. Some of the things that they say as sort of shortcomings around that, people may be unlikely to really get personal. You know, how much do you really want to share with your peers? You may have unspecific feedback. It may increase competition. Again, how much do you want to share with your peers? And then, you know, what's the return on investment? And so one of the pieces that we're really looking at now is sort of that network. And I think Bobby talked about that a little bit in his introduction in terms of that board of directors. So it really is, instead of something being organized for you, your boss sets up a mentor for you, or a peer group, or you do this reverse mentoring. You're at the center of it. You figure out what your needs are, and then you identify a group of people to really help you in that. So it really is centered on yourself, making sure that you get your needs met, but that assumes you know what your needs are. So you have to really think through that. And you create this network of individuals, and you select them. And it can be very flexible, but what is some of the flip side of that? You as the mentee, you have to go out and get those individuals. You have to sustain that relationships. You have to determine what it means. So all of that is really on the protege.
I really love this conversation of, and I'm kind of looking ahead to your mentoring map, but mapping out your mentors as it relates to the many phases of your life. I think about, I have professional mentors, people that help me in a professional manner to advance myself, to be a good professional individual. I have personal mentors, and then I have some faith-based mentors. And so they all have different roles, but they all fit in this, in my lifespan. And when I think about it, sometimes when I look at the map, it almost overwhelms you, because that is energy you're having to share and put into your time and your week. And so it kind of goes back to this idea of ROI. Is this time, energy, and effort worth this mentoring time, bring value to your life? And is it also bringing value to the person that you're meeting with? Are they getting value out of it? What are your thoughts on how to establish those mentoring networks, so that you don't get so overwhelmed with trying to get so many people in your Rolodex before you know it, you're overwhelmed?
Good point. So why don't we go ahead and share that map a little bit so we can see why it might be a little overwhelming. And so you can see that you are in the center of this web or this network, and you can see around there you've got professional support, emotional support, community. You can go through that map. And so the question Bobby has is a good one. A lot of times you may have friends or family that are already in place. It could be because of the community center, the school that you went to, your faith, your place of worship, may be that, especially emotional support. A lot of times that's going to be our friends and our family. But professional development, so I would really look at these and say, do an assessment and figure out which ones do you have in place now, and then which ones don't you have in place, and what are you going to do about that? So for me, when I moved here, one of the things when I looked at this map and I moved here, and it's like, okay, I really need to establish a group of colleagues, friend support network. So I purposefully joined different organizations to do that. I joined church, I made conscious decisions to exercise in clubs or organizations. What was I going to do to get out to establish that? So I would say wherever you're feeling as if you're not having that support, and a lot of times we focus on professional development, and that's where I get a lot of questions is, what level of support do you have? It's great to have support within your organization, and a lot of times you may think of your boss or a prior boss or the person who brought you in the organization. But you're going to need to really broaden that to not only within the organization support, but outside the organization support. So that can help. And you can look at LinkedIn, you can look at professional associations to help do that. I've been part of a lot of professional associations, and that's really where I've gotten a lot of support outside of my sort of corporate environment that I might find myself, my direct profession at this point in time.
I love the question that I usually get from some of my undergraduate students and even some of the grad students. Where do I find a mentor? Where do I start? Like, oh my gosh, it's an overwhelming concept of who do I ask and how do I do this? And I guess I'm leading up to your next slide here, but I'd love for you to share thoughts on how do you get started with this idea of mentoring?
Very good point. And so why don't we go ahead and we'll come back to this mentoring map. But when I think about this, in terms of networking, one of the things that I've had people say that they really don't like is to have somebody that they don't know come up to them and say, will you be my mentor? So a lot of times there needs to be some mutuality involved. And what do I mean by that? It means that you need to really try and have something that that other person might be looking for. And so one of the best ways to get a mentor is to volunteer, to support them in some way. If they're active on a committee, so for example, in my own life, the VP of HR, I was into art, and every time I would show up at some sort of art function, she was always there. And so I remember her asking me, there was a group that asked for someone to be on the board, and she says, would you take this on? And that's how we established a relationship, by me doing something to support, and then I would, sort of interact with her to provide feedback. So try and go to someone that you're interested in this day and age, and see, how might you be able to support them? What boards, what activities, can you help out in that? The other thing that I have found with social media, I have a friend who's brilliant. Start following people. Follow people on them, and then comment on them, and then see again what they're about. And it's amazing how that can come back to you in a very positive way, where they'll say, hey, I've noticed you've been following me, then what can I do to support you? So these are definitely some ways that I've seen. Other thoughts, what have some of your experiences been?
What you think, Mary Alice? What's your thoughts there? I'm gonna unmute you.
Well, my exposure to mentoring, formal mentoring, has been primarily through my church. And this is just a funny story that happened to me. I'll be quick, but about 7 or 8 years ago, our church started this mentoring ministry, and they just invited anyone who was interested to show up for an informational meeting, and they were going to just begin exploring how to make it, how to have a program and organize it in our church. And so I was so excited, and I showed up. I was thrilled because I envisioned that I was going to be assigned this older, wiser woman that was going to help me navigate my life. And I showed up, and they had me meeting over in the group that was supposed to be the mentors. And I'm like, hold up, wait just a minute. I'm not there yet. I'm still supposed to be over here with the young girls that need to learn stuff. I'm not graduated to somebody that's supposed to know something yet. Anyway, so every time I think of mentoring, I just chuckle at that story, because I didn't get a memo when I was supposed to graduate from mentee to mentor. And it was kind of a shocker for me that day. And now, Bobby, I really need you to tell me again exactly what I was supposed to say.
No, that was perfect. That was awesome. I appreciate your story. That was great. I'm looking over here at Jennifer Ash, and she's giggling too. So Jennifer, share something, some sort of story that you have about either mentoring or being mentored.
Well, I was kind of giggling along with Mary Alice, because, there are times where I think personally where we feel like we could use a mentor in a certain aspect of our lives, but there is always going to be someone less seasoned, or however you want to word it, that could learn from us. And I was very lucky early in my career that someone with a lot more experience and much wiser than myself kind of took me under her wing. She sought me out. She saw something in me and decided that she was going to help bring me up the right way. And, you know, that really kind of changed the whole trajectory of my professional life, having that mentor. And I was not wise enough at the time to realize I needed one, but my mentor realized that. And now, you know, 25 years later, she is a very close personal friend. But to Mary Alice's point, I think there are always, you know, it's like there are always going to be people richer than you and poorer than you. There are always going to be people that can mentor you, and there are always going to be people that you can help mentor. So I've tried to kind of keep a lookout in my life professionally for people that I can help, not necessarily be a full-fledged mentor, but I just am always thinking about, you know, is there something that I can impart to this person to help them grow professionally, and just offer myself up in ways like that.
I love that very much. You made me think of, I was working on a project in North Carolina with a group of ministers telling their story through the United Methodist Church conference. And it was basically how they're trying to build more ministers to serve the rural church. And I was interviewing someone, talking to them about their ministry, and one of the ministers really shared something profound for me that's kind of stuck with me a good bit, especially in my days of teaching, that many ministers like to minister because not only are they ministering to the flock, but they're being ministered to by their congregational units. So it's really a duality there, that they may be giving, but they're receiving just as much as they're giving. And so that's, for me personally, that's why I teach. Teaching for me keeps me sharp, you know, to be able to go into a classroom and to be able to explain and teach your profession. It's not only keeping you sharp in your mind to be able to relay information, but you're also getting really, really good feedback and mentoring from your students that keeps you sharp, because it's a dual conversation. And so I love the idea of it's more relational, that it's about give and take. And so that's something that's really stuck with me. Dr. Sims, what are your thoughts? And I didn't mean it to train wreck what you're doing. Love for you to keep rolling.
Oh, thank you so much. And I really like those examples, because I'm a firm believer that everybody leads and everybody is a mentor. And it's just a matter of when that call is going to come, which side of the equation you might find yourself on. But there's this concept around mutuality, that everybody has something to contribute at all stages. So even if you're a less experienced individual, you still have something to contribute, and vice versa. So you want to find that mutuality. The other thing that we know about mentors, who your mentor is and how well that mentoring relationship works, is another something that you need to consider. I've been running this program now at Clemson for faculty, and one of the advantages of having a mentor who is not in your department is that you feel that you can share more, because there's not any chance of that coming back. And so having someone who is not directly in your chain of command as your mentor or your protege could be appropriate. Conversely, and we'll talk about the flip side of that, is if you do have someone in your department, it's much more likely that that person will be more of an advocate for you. And we'll talk more about that in terms of sponsorship. But having a good fit around mentoring, if you can do a match, we try and do like a speed dating mentoring so that people can get to know one another and see if there's that personal connection. And so when you're doing a mentoring session, you know, I was taught you could have it, you know, for a day. I've seen a day event mentoring session. It could be for a season. For us, we typically have it as an academic year. We have sort of a formal process. We have guidelines in terms of coming up with mentoring activities. Or it could be like, I think Marianne was saying, she now has someone who, was it Jennifer, the mentor that is now someone who's like a lifelong friend. And that's sort of that ultimate place that you want to go. So those are the different ways. So, you know, it could be short term, it could be medium term, it could be long term. You just never know. And that's really the beauty of mentoring. Okay, so let's move into talking about our next section, which is sponsors. And so when we think about the term sponsor, what comes to mind?
I mean, immediately I think about sponsoring corporate events, but that is definitely not what we're talking about. That's where my first. I'll be interested. I love this idea of sponsor, so I'm looking forward to you explaining this.
Okay, all right.
Would it be somebody advocating for somebody, or
Ding, ding, ding.
I mean, in a way, just kind of like almost like an agent, sort of saying, I have somebody who, you know, would be great for this position.
Very nice. And so that's the segue that I really wanted to get into in terms of the mentor. If you have a mentor in your department, then that person, the way someone explained sponsorship to me, when you're not in the room, who is advocating on your behalf? That's the definition of a sponsor. And there's some people that say, mentor, who needs a mentor? What you really need is a sponsor, because if you are being considered for that next level promotion or a special assignment, you need someone in the room who's going to advocate on your behalf. And if you don't have a sponsor, there's no one around that's going to do that. And so you might not get that special assignment. And so, you know, sponsors invest in you and are committed to your career success. So these are individuals, typically we were hoping that when we put people together who were mentors, again, as I'm talking about this faculty development program, so after a year, we went back to the mentors and said, hey, how many of you would support that person or advocate for them? And they say, well, you know, we don't really get into knowledge about their day-to-day activity or research or scholarship or teaching. They're not in our department, so I really couldn't say anything about, you know, should they get that promotion or not. Whereas when we consciously put people together, almost serendipitously, who they were in the same department, that's what we saw as outcomes. You ended up with a mentor who then could become a sponsor because they knew that person, they worked with them, and so that person could advocate on their behalf. These are individuals who are going to prepare you for top roles. They're going to have a voice at the decision-making table for you. They're going to provide you on guidance on what to do and what not to do. I remember I had an advocate, a sponsor relationship, and I was approached to take on this role, and I was asking this person about should I take it or not. And you know, knowing the history of the organization, he says, if you don't take this role, they won't ever come to you again and offer it to you. So that's the type of advice that you need in terms of someone who's going to be a sponsor. So sponsors are critical in securing a senior role. And that's why we talk about this, or, you know, all the research, if you see people in senior roles, some of the biggest difference, they tell you they spend all of their time networking. They spend all of their time. They spend 40% of their time just networking, working that sort of emotional intelligence relationship to get jobs done. And, you know, when you get picked on this senior role, most of the time there's no application process. I've been there in HR, there's everybody at the room, the names come up, and then who actually says and vouches for you is going to be the difference between you being considered for that role or not. So, and again, that's when we talk about may initially have been a mentor. So sponsors are very critical for career development and success. How many of you feel that you've had a sponsor in your career? Okay. All right. Who'd like to share a little bit about that relationship and how you view it as a sponsor?
I've had a sponsor that turned into a mentor, a gentleman in Greenville, South Carolina. His name is John Warner, and John, I've known him for over 12 years, and I remember him taking an ownership in making sure he advocated for me, and when I didn't even know it. And next thing I knew, I was having lunch with him on a regular basis, and he was just interested in me. And now it has turned into a mentor role, where we don't meet on a regular basis, but I talk to him on a good bit, you know, here and there. But when I have a question or I need help or need advice on navigating a business situation, when I call him, he always answers, and he's very dependable. And that has been something that's been very critical to me, because I feel like he has really good business sense, and he also shoots me straight. I mean, man shoots me really straight and tells me things that I just do not want to hear, but I really need to hear it. And that's why I value that relationship. And it's grown over the years from that basic sponsor, making sure that I'm advancing myself, checking in on me, you know, taking me to lunch, to turning into really deep questions of advice on business and personal, and then also helping each other. So we've even shared business together. So anyway, that's been an example for me that's been, I would say, mission critical for my success in many different facets of my life.
That's fabulous. And I would like to share something. I read this recent book, and this woman was recounting her career success. So for those of you saying, well, how do I get this sponsor? So she knew that she wanted to advance, and she knew that the only way that she was going to advance was to get senior leadership. And so what did she do? She identified, and I think it was literally the CEO of her company, and how every day at a certain time he would show up at these different activities or events. I don't remember what it was. And so she figured out where he was, and she made sure she was there each time he showed up. And she had done some research on some of the activities that he was interested in. And so she made it known to him, you know, it might be at a coffee class or something like that, that she would be willing to help in some of these areas because she had interest or expertise. And he remembered that. And so because she was always there, eventually in these times, he actually approached her and said, I've got this project, would you be willing to help? That's how she developed her sponsorship activity. So it was a little creepy. She stalked the CEO, but you know, it worked out on her behalf. So, you know, sometimes you know, this is where they talk about making a way out of no way, and she did it, you know. So some of you may want to do that or not, but these are, if you're really interested in moving up in senior leadership, you need a sponsor.
That's something that, especially my undergraduate students that I teach, I encourage them. We have one class session that we dedicate to this topic. And so I make them meet me at a coffee shop. And they were like, why are we meeting in a coffee shop out of class? And so I get them and I buy them all coffee. And we sit there for a second and I tell them that now is the time to start building your network and to be very intentional about it. And I told them, I said, look, let's think about this. Imagine if you took twice a month, you went and found someone new that you didn't know that could benefit you as an opportunity to have in your Rolodex. Go buy them coffee. And many people ask, well, what do I talk about? I'm like, you don't talk, you question them. You ask questions. You make them feel like they are in a position of leadership, and you allow them to mentor you. And nothing is more flattering than allowing someone to talk about themselves. And at the end of it, more than likely, because that person was put in that position of leadership, will say, man, I need to take care of this kid. I'm going to follow them along. And so the point being is that I challenge the simple coffee routine. Twice a week, go out and find someone new. Research them on LinkedIn. To your point, Dr. Sims, just stalk them. Figure out where they are and where they've been and how you're connected and what interests you might have. Make 3 questions, reach out, buy them coffee, and just ask them for advice. And it goes a long way. It's amazing how those relationships can turn into sponsors and then thus into mentors. So,
Bobby,
yes, ma'am.
I have something to add. I am a huge believer in connecting people. When I see people that can mutually benefit from association, I introduce them through email. I've done it for you, several times. And the benefit to me is that I can turn to these folks later and ask them to help me with their expertise. Bobby's got social media expertise. Cynthia has organizational expertise. I've done it time and time again. And people always return my call because I typically do have the mindset of connection, and that works for me.
And that's fabulous, Nan, because Nan would be one of those people. They say that there are people who are sort of super connectors. Nan is a super connector. She knows everybody. Don't ever go out with her.
You never get out of there.
And so, those individuals are very valuable because they have someone in their social network. And so a great example. Thank you for that. So let's talk about coach. How many of you have had a coach of some sort? Okay, all right, show of hands.
Anybody else? Let's see. Let's scroll through here. Who's going to admit it? Anybody had a coach? Should I pick on someone?
This is
Oh, Mary, tell us about the coach.
Okay. I've had several coaches in my time. But the one that basically kind of stuck out to me, in a way, she has been a mentor. She's sponsored me. She's coached me throughout my entire career, you can kind of say, in social work field. She taught me how to basically dress the right way, to be able to approach people, the response of, how to work with multi people, of all colors, race, whatever, she just really stuck with me. And I've known her for a long time. That I knew her first as a personal person. We just had a personal relationship, but she was in the profession for social work, and I was very interested in it because I could just hear the love that she actually had for it, and I had the love for children at the same time, and now I have the serious love for adults, for the elderly, and just really kind of following her and paying attention to what she was doing. I stayed in her area as well. I kind of stalked her too. But I, and it was fun, just kind of being around her, being in the same room and watching how she worked the room. She was everywhere. And it was amazing to me just to see how she would walk into the room and everybody knew her, and now my son tells me when we go out, he'll say, Mom, you know everybody, or everybody know you, or they'll say, oh, you're Mary's son, that kind of thing. And I didn't even think about it at the time that now I'm starting to shape to be her. And I really like that. Really. Thank y'all.
That's fabulous. Thanks so much for sharing. And it's amazing how we are not necessarily conscious of how people have shaped us, and how we have made ourselves in those images. And a lot of times, how we behave is based upon what we've seen. So that's definitely a testimony. Well, let's talk a little bit about coaching and what's different between coaching and mentoring. So coaches are typically a short-term relationship. They may not have any expertise in your area. They're guiding you to get from point A to point B if you had a specific goal. So I've used a coach once when I was preparing for a VP job, and I wanted to be the best internal candidate for that role. And so I really had a coach to help me pull together and think through everything that I needed so I could be prepared for that interview. So as you can see here, that means that a coach is driven by a personal developmental need of the client. A lot of times people in new roles, new leadership roles in organizations, in my last organization, all new VPs had a coach given to them. It's typically a collaborative relationship. It focuses on something targeted, short-term goal. It could be a soft skill. And it really helps that person really to think things through so you get around constraints, explore possibilities. It will help the client hold accountable. So they typically will challenge you, challenge your thinking, make sure you have specific goals and that you're meeting them and hold you accountable for that. And so it really is a developmental growth. So you may have a coach given to you. A lot of organizations now may have coaches that you can gain access to on a short-term basis. You might want to have someone who you could work with, that you actually contract with, to really sort of help you think through different things. So those are really what the role of a coach is. It's a short-term relationship. We do leadership development coaching in our organization or in the program that I'm with, so that we give people coaches to sort of work through leadership and to look at their sort of my background. When I've gone through leadership development programs and others, we would literally give people a series of assessments, and then based on that assessment, that 360 feedback, we'd have them come up with specific goals that they needed to have in order to take the feedback and put it in practice. So those are some of the ways that one might have a coach. So let's go on and just sort of wrap up, really. And I love this slide, so a mentor talks with you, a sponsor talks about you, and a coach talks to you. So, if you want to have sort of a shorthand version of what a coach is, a mentor and a sponsor, that's it. And so sort of summary, a mentor informally or informally helps you navigate your career, provide guidance. Who drives the relationship typically is the mentor, is reactive and responsive to your needs, really helps you around career possibilities. And it's always about career guidance and what we call social emotional support. Sponsored, someone in a senior role, typically who uses strong influence to help you obtain highly visible assignments, promotions, or jobs. I think Bobby and I were saying, we've been blessed in our careers. I think in my entire career, I've applied for 3 jobs. All the other jobs, someone came to me and said, hey, there's this opportunity I think you'd be great in. There's this opportunity, would you consider applying? So it is a much better place to be to have somebody show up and call you and say they have a job opening than for you to have to apply. So that's really one of the values of having a network. So those are your sponsors. And you never know who those might individuals be. So again, when you're not there, who's advocating on your behalf, someone who's going to be there to champion your work and your potential with others. And then last is coach, so who's driving that relationship? You and your coach are responsible for driving the relationship. You can reach out to a coach. Sometimes, again, you can contract with those. Sometimes organizations will supply you with those. But your coach can also reach out to you. And it really is a short-term goal, developmental in its focus, to help you reach that potential that you may not be able to do. They really are sort of critical think processes to sort of help block you if you're saying, hey, I can't really sort of figure this next step out. Do I go up for promotion this year or next year? Should I stay here? Any of those things a coach can really help you do. So, just to sort of wrap up, one of the reasons that we really like you to look at your network map is to say, hey, where is my network today, and is it sufficient to meet not only where I am today, but where I want to go? I mean, sometimes you can just end up in a very comfortable set of relationships. You've got these great friends. I remember I had a place in time in corporate where I felt like I had the trifecta. I had the perfect team, I had the perfect boss, and I had the perfect client. How many times does that happen? Who wants to mess that up, right? You have the trifecta of the world. But that's good for this place and time. How do you prepare for that next step? That next role that you want to place. And even if it's not a position, for me, myself, I wanted to say, hey, once my daughter graduated from college, I could do whatever I wanted. Did I want to stay in corporate America? So I decided I wanted to go back and get this advanced degree. I already had a master's. I started a doctorate, never completed it. It's like, okay, it was time. And so that was me looking forward. So what support networks do I need to have in place to go to that next phase? And that's what we're really going to ask you to do. So who is in your developmental network, and do you have the right people in place? And the only person who can really answer that is you. So I really would encourage you to take a look at your network and think about that. So we sent out that network map, and so when you start thinking about that, and we're not going to do this as an activity right now, but think about, what are your professional goals and your personal goals? Are they short term? Are they long term? And then just think about one goal, and so who do you have in your network that can help you achieve that? Mentor, sponsor, coaches, role models, and then place that name on those developmental maps to see, do you have the support that you need, or do you need to expand that?
I love this this idea of setting goals. I remember when I first started, when I moved out of a industry of broadcast television, and I went back to school to get my master's, and broke out and started business for myself. I knew I had to build out this idea of mentoring, but I didn't even have this kind of structure to put to it. And so I love the structure. I wish I would have had this structure that you've laid out so nicely, Dr. Sims. 15 years ago, after I got out of grad school, I would be in a lot different place probably, but I really appreciate the structure that you have brought and the thought process you brought today. This is amazing work, and we appreciate your thought leadership.
I want to be mindful of people's time, but I have a couple of comments. I mean, one of the things that I think that we all have to think about when creating these networks is truly being open to feedback. And for that, that's putting yourself in a vulnerable position in a lot of ways. It's kind of, opening yourself up and if you have a hard time, getting or receiving that feedback, maybe looking at why that might be, or, what might be holding you back and that kind of thing. I know, one of the things that Nan and I do, I'm gonna call Nan out, but Nan and I do together is Nan is able to, I know that I have my limitations, but on the other hand, we kind of laugh at them in some ways, but I also realize that, she provides me feedback in order for me to improve upon that. And as a supervisor, as a supervisor and a supervisee, that helps me because it's not saying that this is an inherently bad thing about you, but it's something that maybe you can adjust a little bit.
I love it that you bring it up. You cannot be brave without experiencing fear. And you've just got to know that. And then when you start getting the feedback, it's not bad, and you can get to the humorous edge. So
Yeah.
That's well said, Sally.
Yeah.
Well,
Wow.
I really appreciate everybody joining in today. My job as a moderator to make sure that we are respectful to everybody's time. It is 2 minutes to 11. We really appreciate people joining in for these webinars. They have been a lot of thought leadership is coming through here. Really thankful for the Center for Corporate Learning to really providing these as an opportunity for people to connect. And I would say encourage people on this webinar today to scroll through and see the names and try to connect with people on this call. I think this would be a great opportunity to build relationships here because people are coming here to learn. And so what better way to connect is to connect with people that are eager to learn with each other. And so thanks for everybody for tuning in. And I will turn it back over to our friends Nan and Sally and just say thanks. Appreciate you guys' time.
Yeah, no, I can only echo. Thank you, Bobby. And thank you so much, Cynthia. It's been such a treat having you in the house this morning. And I look forward to seeing all of us again virtually and perhaps even personally someday. So take it easy on yourself and we'll get through this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Mhm.